Act 4. The Blue Alchemist. The brush struck the canvas with the sound of a breaking wave. Celeste's fingers, still stained cobalt from yesterday's work, tightened around the handle. The bristles bent against the taut linen, dragging pigment in a slow, deliberate arc. The studio air smelled of linseed oil and crushed lapis, thick enough to taste. Outside, the streets of Lyon hummed with the clatter of carts and the distant tolling of St. Jean's bells. But here, in the high attic with its slanted ceiling and single grimy window, there was only the rasp of bristle on fabric and the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. She had not set out to become a legend. The first painting had been an accident, a study of the Meridian, the merchant vessel that had carried Blanc away from her all those years ago. She had sketched it from memory, the way the ship's hull had gleamed under a sickly moon, the way the fog had curled around its railings like grasping fingers. But when she showed the sketch to her apprentice, the girl had gasped. "It's like the stories," she'd said, "the ones the old painters whisper about. The ship that took the blue alchemist's lover." Celeste had not corrected her. Now, the legend had taken on a life of its own. The artists of Lyon spoke of her in hushed tones, as if she were already a ghost. The Blue Alchemist, they called her, though she had never been an alchemist, only a painter who refused to let her work be unmade. They said her hands were stained with the same cobalt she had sworn could not be extracted, that her studio was haunted by the memory of the man who had tried to distill her into something he could own. And perhaps they were right. She stepped back, squinting at the canvas. There it was, the Meridian, its sails tattered, its hull wreathed in phosphorescent fog. And there, in the background, the figure she had painted a dozen times before. Blanc, frozen in coral, his limbs stiff, his face half buried in the stone. Forever part of the canvas, but never its master. Her throat ached. She had not thought of him in years, or so she told herself. The truth was, she thought of him every time she mixed pigment, every time she dipped her brush into the cobalt and felt the weight of it on the bristles, every time she looked at her hands and saw the stains that would not wash clean. A knock at the door. Celeste did not turn. "If it's another commission, tell them I'm not taking new work." The door creaked open. "It's not a commission." She recognized the voice. Marguerite, her eldest apprentice, the one who had been with her since the beginning. The girl stepped into the studio, her skirts whispering against the floorboards. She carried a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age. Celeste set down her brush. "What is that?" Marguerite hesitated. "It was left at the door. No note." A cold prickle ran down Celeste's spine. She reached for the box, her fingers brushing the grain of the wood. It was warm, as if it had been held recently. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, lay a single vial. The glass was clouded with age, but the liquid inside was unmistakable. A deep, shimmering cobalt, the exact shade of her pigment. Her breath stilled. Marguerite leaned closer. "Is that?" Celeste did not answer. She lifted the vial, turning it in the light. The liquid inside swirled, thick and viscous, catching the sunlight like a living thing. "She always said her pigment couldn't be extracted." Blanc's voice, echoing from a memory she had tried to bury. She set the vial down with deliberate care. "Burn it." Marguerite's eyes widened. "But, burn it," Celeste repeated, sharper this time. "And don't let anyone else see it." Marguerite hesitated, then nodded. She took the box, her fingers trembling slightly as she closed the lid. Celeste turned back to the canvas. The Meridian loomed before her, its fog curling like smoke. She picked up her brush, dipped it into the cobalt, and painted over Blanc's face. The pigment resisted at first, clinging to the bristles, but she pressed harder, dragging the color across the canvas until his features blurred into the stone, until there was nothing left of him but a smudge of blue. A knock at the door again. Celeste did not look up. "I said no commissions." The door opened. This time, it was not Marguerite. A man stood in the doorway, his clothes fine but travel-worn, his face lined with years she did not recognize. He carried a portfolio under one arm, its leather cracked with age. Celeste's fingers tightened around the brush. "Who are you?" The man bowed. "A collector, madame. I've come a long way to see the work of the Blue Alchemist." She did not answer. The air in the studio felt suddenly thick, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The man stepped forward, unrolling the portfolio with careful hands. Inside was a painting, one she had not seen in decades. A study of the meridian, its hull wreathed in fog, its railings reaching toward the viewer like desperate fingers. And in the background, half buried in coral, a figure with Blanc's face. Her chest ached. The man watched her closely. They say you painted this from memory. Celeste said nothing. They say the man in the coral is the one who tried to steal your work. She set down the brush. What do you want? The man's lips curled into a smile. I want to know the truth. The truth. The words settled over her like a weight. She had spent years crafting the legend. The blue alchemist, the painter who refused to be extracted, who stood unbroken over her vat of cobalt while her lover turned to stone. It was a good story, a clean one. But the truth was messier. The truth was that she had loved him, that she had watched him leave on the meridian and known, even then, that he would not return, that she had spent years trying to forget the way his hands had trembled when he spoke of alchemy, the way his eyes had darkened when he looked at her work, not with admiration, but with hunger. The truth was that she had let the legend grow because it was easier than admitting she had failed, that she had not been strong enough to stop him, that she had lacked the power to rescue him. The man was still watching her. Well? Celeste picked up her brush. The truth is in the painting. He frowned. That's not an answer. She dipped the bristles into the cobalt, dragging the color across the canvas in a slow, deliberate stroke. It's the only one I have. The man hesitated, then rolled up the portfolio. Very well. But the world will remember the legend, madame, not the truth. Celeste did not look up. The world remembers what it wants to remember. He left, without another word. She set down the brush and stepped back, studying the canvas. The meridian was nearly finished now, its hull gleaming under the studio's dim light. And in the background, just visible beneath the fog, Blanc's coral form loomed, half erased, half remembered. She had spent years painting him out of the story. But some things could not be unmade. Outside, the bells of St. Jean tolled again, their sound echoing through the streets of Lyon. Celeste wiped her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of cobalt on the fabric. The legend would endure. And so would she. The stone remembered. That was the first thing Iris knew, centuries after the last breath had left her lungs. The stone remembered, and so did she. Trapped in its slow, crystalline embrace, her consciousness stretched thin as coral polyps, her thoughts diffused through the calcium lattice that had replaced her bones. She was no longer flesh, not entirely, but neither was she gone. The transformation had preserved her, though preservation was too gentle a word. It was a theft, a slow erosion, a surrender that had become its own kind of eternity. The chamber was dark, but not empty. Light did not penetrate here, not truly, but the coral glowed faintly, a bioluminescence that pulsed in time with the slow, deep rhythms of the sea. It was the only movement in this place, the only sign that time had not stopped entirely. The glow came from Blanc, or what remained of him. His coral form was pressed against hers, their bodies fused where the transformation had claimed them both. His arm wrapped around her waist, her cheek resting against the curve of his shoulder. They had not chosen this embrace, not consciously, but the alchemy had decided for them, binding them together as it calcified their flesh. Centuries had passed, or perhaps only moments. Time did not behave as it once had. Not here. Not in this sealed chamber where the rules of the world above no longer applied. The merfolk told stories of this place, of the two figures locked in eternal embrace. Some said they were at peace. Others whispered that they were still screaming. Iris knew the truth. She was both. The coral did not allow for easy thought. Her consciousness was not the sharp, focused thing it had once been. It was diffuse, spread thin through the lattice of her new body, her awareness flickering like the glow of the coral itself. She could feel Blanc beside her, his presence a warmth against the cold of the stone, a pressure where their bodies met. She could feel the slow, steady pulse of the sea beyond the chamber walls, the distant vibration of currents moving through the deep. The burden of the sea dwellers' tales pressed upon her consciousness, how they shunned this location, how they laid their hands upon the barrier's surface and sensed the subtle pulse of existence trapped beneath. She did not sleep. She did not dream. She simply was, suspended in this state of eternal half-existence, her mind drifting through the fragments of memory that the coral had not yet claimed. She remembered the first time she had seen Blanc, his hands steady as he ground pearls into powder, his eyes focused on the task before him. She remembered the way his fingers had trembled when he spoke of Celeste, the way his voice had gone soft, almost reverent. She remembered the first time she had brought him a pearl, the way he had looked at her, not with desire, but with something closer to recognition. She remembered the way he had taken the pearl from her, his fingers brushing against hers, the warmth of his skin lingering long after he had turned away. She remembered the consomme, the way it had burned going down, the way it had hollowed her out from the inside, the way it had stolen her voice, her luster, herself. She remembered the vial with her name on it, the way Blanc had looked at her when she drank it, his eyes wide with something like guilt, something like relief. She remembered the way the broth had turned cobalt, then black, the way it had absorbed all light, all hope, all possibility. She remembered the moment the transformation had begun, the way her skin had gone stiff, the way her bones had ached as the coral took hold, the way Blanc had reached for her, his hand shaking, his voice raw with something like regret. She remembered the way he had pressed his forehead to hers, the way his breath had hitched as the coral claimed him too, the way their bodies had fused together, the way the chamber had sealed itself behind them, trapping them in this eternal, impossible embrace. She remembered the stories the merfolk told, the way they spoke of this place in hushed tones, the way they avoided the sealed stone, the way they pressed their palms against it and felt the faint pulse of life within. She remembered the way the stories were never clear on whether this fate was communion or condemnation, and she knew, with the slow, certain clarity of the coral, that it was both. Sounds echoed through the room. There were no voices, no screams, no words, but there was sound, the slow, steady pulse of the sea, the faint hum of the coral, the distant vibration of the currents moving through the deep. There was the sound of her own thoughts, drifting like sediment through the lattice of her new body, slow and heavy and inevitable. Blanc's proximity comforted her, his nearness offering solace amid the frigid rocks surrounding them. She could feel the way their bodies were fused together, the way the coral had claimed them both, the way it had bound them in this eternal, impossible embrace. She could feel the weight of the stories the merfolk told, the way they avoided this place, the way they pressed their palms against the sealed stone and felt the faint hum of life within. She did not know if she was at peace. She did not know if she was screaming. She only knew that she was here, that she was still aware, that the coral had not yet claimed everything. And perhaps that was enough. The glow of the coral pulsed, slow and steady, a rhythm that matched the beat of the sea beyond the chamber walls. Iris let her awareness drift, let her thoughts scatter like sediment through the lattice of her new body. She could feel Blanc beside her, his presence a warmth, a pressure, a reminder of what they had been, of what they had become. The stories would continue. The merfolk would keep telling them, keep avoiding this place, keep pressing their palms against the sealed stone and feeling the faint hum of life within. And Iris would remain, suspended in this state of eternal half-existence, her consciousness diffused through the coral, her thoughts drifting like sediment through the lattice of her new body. She was both at peace and screaming. She was both communion and condemnation. She was the warning and the monument, the proof and the cost.